being or unpacking or directly talking about the week that our country has had, but is very much a response to it. I think there are a lot of articles and like a lot of people are talking about it, and I am trying to bring us a different side. Um, so I just want to put that in context and name that, and I know that's there, and I know it's been a week, and this is still a response to that, even if it's not a direct unpacking of those events. So I'm reading a poem by Marie Howe called Annunciation. I may have even shared it in worship before. I'll share it again at some point. I'm sure this poem is so beautiful. So settle in and let these words see where they reach you, see where they resonate. Even if I don't see it again, nor ever feel it, I know it is, and that if once it hailed me, it ever does. And so it is myself I want to turn in that direction, not as towards a place, but it was a tilting within myself, as one turns a mirror to flash the light to where it isn't. I was blinded like that, and swam in what shone at me, only able to endure it by being no one. And so, specifically myself, I thought I'd die from being loved like that. Last week, I listened to an old album, a favorite of mine from high school. It was a worship album from the emergent church I used to go to. And as I listened to those songs again, songs I haven't heard in at least 10 years, my whole body lit up. I was driving back from a day in Duluth and I was just jamming out in the car. I think I listened to the CD, 2.5 times. That was the only thing I listened to on the way back, just on repeat. And I say all of this because that experience reminded me so viscerally that a spiritual life is not only an intellectual pursuit. Caroline Myss says, a spiritual life is not, repeat, not a mental intellectual experience. It is a prayerful, contemplative, mystical, reflective journey that, in fact, draws you out of your mental world. Your mind is the last place you want to be as you contemplate the nature of what is real in your life and what is of value. Now, listen, I love the rigor of thought and examination that Unitarian Universalists bring to their faith and to their communities. I think there is something powerful and necessary about the integrity and intensity of thought in Unitarian Universalism. But I also think that Unitarian Universalism is so poised to be the people of faith and feeling. And we miss that opportunity when we only focus on the mental aspects of faith. We are notably and notoriously a non-creedal people. That means we care more about why you believe what you believe in and how it shows up in the world. But we recognize that what's inside that particular belief medicine bag is an entirely personal thing. That being said, we are people who are united because something has moved us to our core to live and act differently in the world. It's a feeling that we recognize as beyond words, a feeling that can't be named and is known by 1,000 names at least. And so we say, call it what you want. God, justice, generosity, connection, spirit, love, universe. There are as many ways of knowing that animating element as there are people who have experienced it. But it is that experience that unites us, and we are called into shared experience together in worship and action in the world. We could so easily become the people of experiential faith. Now, I say this as a mystic, someone for whom the divine is and has been palpable, a knowing deep in my body that I am connected and loved and whole, and so is everyone else I've ever met. I was raised in a place where the only people really talking about that around me were church people and Lutherans, so I fell in with them. When I was in high school, it was the evangelicals. I knew intellectually that I didn't fit in there, but they had the same fire that I did, the same warmth in their hearts and constant push to do something about it. I went to seminary, I went to a monastery, I went to a convent, I went to a big church and a small church and meditation centers. And I was so baffled and upset when people spent time arguing about what it could or couldn't be called, who got it and who didn't, what it was and what it wasn't. What was missing from so many of these places was the obsession for the experience of being seen as you are and blinded by beauty and connected to others. Because if that isn't divine and holy as hell, then I don't know what is. And then I found the Unitarian Universalists. I stumbled in, arms folded, sitting near the back, reluctant to talk to anyone, suspicious that this is going to be another place that would let me down and hurt me. And I think maybe that's why I avoided checking out UUs for so long. They seemed like the Hail Mary pass, and I couldn't stand to be disappointed and out of options. But instead, finally, I had found a people who were expansive, inclusive, and standing on the side of love. But as I was listening to the worship album, I had this hunger again, this hunger for that visceral movement. Music was a big part of that when I was younger, and maybe it's just a pandemic situation that we're not singing together. And maybe I just don't know enough Peter Mayer, but I don't know of any UU worship albums that have that same fervor. So I listened. I listened to that album, and sure there's language and theology that I'm absolutely uncomfortable with. But instead of letting that be a barrier, I just say, a rose by any other name, and tap back into that heart place, that heartfelt place that draws me once again to the ground of being. We're right back to my materialism, right? My faith is an experience more than it's an idea. And let me step aside for 1 minute to say, words matter. Ideas are powerful. And especially when we're fighting for inclusion and equity, those are worthy discussions to be in. But what I'm saying powerfully today is that it cannot stop there. Hope is an action, not an idea or even a mindset. Sure, that might need to come first, but if your actions don't match your aspirations, what is the point? Anti-racism work, for example, is frankly useless if it doesn't leave your intellect and show up in your body and in your actions in the world. If it doesn't show up in who you seek out, who you include, who you invite, who you listen to and magnify, where you go and how you behave. But I also want to say this, and I can only speak for myself, but my judgment is not my best gift to the world. I can reflect and be critical and call out baloney when I see it, but my critical nature more often than not will get the best of me. And it's so easy for me to spiritualize that and to see the times when it can be helpful. Talking to my school administration about the poor response to the mobs in DC, for example. But when I give my mind an inch, they'll take a mile and be on hyper alert, go into critic mode, and suddenly everything is wrong and everyone is wrong, including myself. I think the spiritual word we use is discernment, but I know and I am learning personally how painful that can be. This constant sorting and separating into good and bad, right and wrong, better or worse, acceptable or unacceptable. And when I get caught up in that mental realm, I borrow a prayer from Sister Joan Chittister, who prays, help me see the world as you do, God. She's a Catholic nun, and so her prayer is addressed to God, but again, fill in whatever name or source or connection works for you. Because that prayer, that mantra snaps me back into my body. It's about seeing, but seeing with the heart instead of with the mind. It's an experience of loving people and believing there's more to them than what I can see and judge. It's not easy, but it's better than my sword-wielding brain on a crusade. Help me see the world as you see the world. is a centering, deep cry, bringing me back to that experience of connection that I remember feeling, even if I'm not feeling it now. If it once hailed me, it ever does, right? So today I'm asking, begging, reminding, calling you to remember and remember your spirituality as some kind of embodied feeling and experience. Joy, gladness, meaning, connection. These are not ideas that need your agreement. These are experiences that sneak up on you, knock the wind out of you, and comfort and challenge you all at once. The problem of preaching, especially for a mystic, is that I can't give you experiences. In the 10 or 20 minutes I have, even in the talk back afterwards, I can't have you feel what I felt, learn what I've learned, been moved by what I've been moved by. I can't give you anything except for my own stories of my own experiences. I can just show up and say, this was powerful for me. Maybe you felt that too. Maybe keep an eye out for it. And I've said it before, and I know I'll say it again, bodies are what unite us. We can argue all day about words and ideas, but hunger and love and joy and pain, these are the realest things I know and experiences we have all shared. We come back to this place because we know what grief is, we know what delight is, and when we start there, we can't help but start from a place of inclusion, love, and belonging. There was one place where I saw and I felt this divide palpably. I was privileged to study at the World Council of Churches in Geneva, Switzerland, and there were two main branches of the work there. One was an ecumenical institute, which just means lots of different denominations and kinds of Christians. And in this institute, very smart, very learned people sat together talking about how to find common ground and smoothing out the sticky points. And I was so frustrated sitting in those meetings because I knew these big traditions weren't going to change. Like, it's the definition of orthodoxy not to change. So I don't know why I'm debating what actually happens during communion with someone whose basic creed is, this is how we've always done it. There's so much beauty in that tradition. Change is not their forte. So sure, there were moments of intellectual acrobatics that were really interesting, but then there was this other branch of the work. On the other side of the building were the faith in action groups. People working on HIV positive travel restrictions, clean water initiatives, working with UN peacekeepers. Now, I don't know whose life was materially changed by the Ecumenical Institute. I hope there was some new insights there. But I could easily get a line a mile long of folks whose lives were materially different because of the faith in action teams. They didn't sit in their meetings and say, well, as a Presbyterian, I believe we should work to destigmatize living with HIV. It was something they all knew and agreed on. And I see the UUs firmly standing on the side of action, caring about how you show up in the world and curious about what motivates you to do so. And yet, we are so often painted as aloof ivory tower intellectuals who can't even sing a hymn together because we're reading ahead to see whether or not we agree with the words. I love new ideas. I love a good argument. I love being challenged, and I love learning, and I love being able to unpack and explain something I fervently believe in. But I crave connection and belonging and transcendence and action and impact and a community who is dedicated to those things together. COVID has amplified this longing by increasing the absence. I drove to Lake Superior last Sunday because I hadn't been able to go up north at all over my break. And I missed the land. I craved the land. It wasn't enough to know she was there, to look at pictures, to see the trees outside of the cabin as I FaceTimed with my sister. I needed my body to be in that place, to have those waves crash onto my own eardrums, to crunch my feet over the snow and pebbles and grasses. I drove to greet the frost on the evergreens lining the highway. I winked as the sun melted through my car windows. I tasted the water even as they froze my fingers, filling up my thermos. And in these shortened days, not wanting to drive on dark or icy roads, I spent more time in the car than I did on the shore. But the experience of getting out of the city, of seeing familiar tree friends and greeting the lake, every moment was precious. This is the kind of faith that I'm talking about. This is the kind of hope and presence. I love how inclusive and wild and bright and thoughtful the UUs are. I wouldn't be here if I didn't find a home in this place. But it is my suspicion and my experience that there is something deeper than our minds that is what we most have in common. So while I can't make you experience that today, I ask you to remember, to lose your mind for a moment and remember what a truly small part of your body that really is. There are so many other ways of knowing, and I know you know that. So don't know it with your mind, but this week try knowing it again, experiencing it again. When we face a vexing and turbulent world, we turn to our faith and we return to our bodies to bring us back to the healing wholeness of the beloved community. Amen. Before we listen to sort of our transition song between the message and the talk back, or maybe that's not the right word, our conversation, I'm just going to put a few parameters on the conversation that we have following. I don't want to hear any ideas. In this next shared time, I only want you to share stories of somatic experiences. A time in the last 6 months, a time in the last year, maybe how and why you got involved with Unitarian Universalisms or churches, but I want to hear about a time when you were moved to your core. And to have that be what we share back with one another are these experiential moments. So use this time of music, this time of reflection as we move into this next phase of our conversation to really go searching for those, check in, go find those things, see what you can harvest and offer to the group from below your eyeballs, from there down, and offer that to us today. It would be my request. So Chuck, I think you have some music for us, and then we'll get to share our embodied experiences together.
Yeah, I'll just continue some of the winter song here.
Thank you for that, Chuck. Does anyone have an experience they would like to share? I'm going to not necessarily call on people unless everyone jumps in at once, but just